Two most important questions for anybody running for president are not will you run and can you win, but what's your vision for the country and can you lead us there?
She is perhaps the most famous woman in the world, and right now, pretty much the only U.S. Democrat getting those kind of questions. Hillary Clinton has the experience, she has the support, but she has baggage too. The Benghazi embassy attack happened on Clinton's watch. She voted for the war in Iraq. She has some strong views about what's happening in Iraq now, not to mention views on an issue she says Canada and the U.S. are doing all wrong. We sat down this morning in Toronto, where she was promoting her new book. So we're, incredibly grateful that you've chosen to come here after a week of interviews to really finally tell everybody what exactly you're going to do, whether or not. Saving it for Canada is quite something.
Well, we have a very close relationship, so I'm happy to be here. Both my husband and I have loved coming to Canada. He has spent a lot of time here since he left the White House, and I have accepted every invitation that I possibly could for the same reason. It's a beautiful country. We have a lot in common. There's more we can do together, so it's a welcome opportunity for me.
But in spite of all those things, this isn't going to be the place where you declare whether or not you're running for president.
I'm not ready to do that anywhere, so don't take it personally, please.
I mean, you did in 2008.
Yes.
What's really changed for you since 2008 that you wouldn't want to be in?
Well, it's such a highly personal decision. Our politics have gotten even more difficult. Trying to get things done is harder now than it was even 6, 7 years ago.
But you don't shy away from those
No,
challenges.
I don't.
You talk about your hard choices.
I
your
do.
book previous talked about hard choices.
That's right. And at the end, in the epilogue, I say, look, the two most important questions for anybody running for president are not will you run and can you win, but what's your vision for the country and can you lead us there? I take that very seriously. Having run once, having been in the White House with my husband, having now worked very closely with President Obama, and even, frankly, working with George W. Bush after 9/11 because I was a senator from New York, the job is almost indescribably difficult. I mean, we have a head of state, a head of government all rolled up into one. 24/7 media has made decision-making forced. People have to say something to the press, whether we've thought through what the implications are or not. The political divide that has grown up. So I want to take my time because it really comes down to what your gut is telling you.
Obviously, many people of both genders want you to run. But there is enormous pressure from women for you to run.
Yes.
They see you as the choice, the best choice. Mm-hmm. You have that famous question that was asked to you, if not you, who?
Well, I would say this. I'm well aware of that. I'm incredibly touched by it and feel responsible because of it. And I know that it's important that we break that highest and hardest glass ceiling. I also believe there are quite a few women who are eminently qualified, but may not have the profile. Oh, a lot of the women senators. We have a couple of women governors. I'm talking on the Democratic side. So we have a good bench, so to speak. But they haven't gone through the fire. And part of the reason why there's a big drumbeat for me to run is because I've done it. I was the first woman to win a political primary in the United States. We got those 18 million votes, which represent the cracks in the glass ceiling. So people know that I'm ready, I can do the job, I have no questions about qualifications, all of that. And therefore I think they see me as someone who just has to make up her mind and get going. But there are a lot of other women who are eminently qualified, in my opinion, to be president.
I want to talk about a number of the issues that you've already hinted at that are facing America today in terms of decisions that it has to make. And first on the front burner, suddenly, in the last week, is Iraq once again.
Right.
You talk about Iraq in the book, mainly in terms of how badly you feel about the decision you made in 2002 in supporting the war. And one has to wonder after the last week, as we seem to watch Iraq crumbling in front of our very eyes, whether, as bad as the decision may have been to go into Iraq, the decision to leave Iraq, which you were a part of, was almost as bad, if not as bad.
Well, I disagree with that, Peter. I think that the decision for the United States to leave Iraq was put into motion before President Obama took office. President George W. Bush understood that there had to be a timetable that the Iraqis could look toward. When President Obama came in, there's no doubt that he was against the war, very vocally. That was one of the big issues in our primary campaign. But he was very attentive, because I was in those meetings, as you say, to determining what would come next.
Was the picture that's being painted now painted in those meetings, this possibility?
Well, the Iraqis never agreed to the conditions they had to agree to for us to stay. For our troops to remain in Iraq in the numbers that we were talking about would have required something called a status of forces agreement, and that's what we have all over the world. It protects our soldiers, it provides certain immunities that they are entitled to because they're there at the invitation of a government. There was an enormous amount of effort put in to persuading Maliki to agree to a status of forces agreement. He would not do so. He wanted a lot of American sophisticated weaponry like fighter jets and sophisticated intelligence equipment, but he didn't want to agree to troops.
Is the bottom line that Maliki has to go, that he has botched this?
Well, the bottom line is he was just reelected. His party was just reelected, and I think that was...
but he could be toppled.
That was a good news, bad news story, right? I have made clear that I would not support any effort by the United States to back up his government unless the conditions we had been asking for a number of years were finally met. My attitude is, whether you approved of or didn't approve of the Bush action in the beginning, the United States did its best to give the people of Iraq a different future, but we can't stage manage what they do. There was still an enormous amount of effort put in to try to convince Maliki to build a more inclusive, representative government, and now they're going to have to fight for it.
Does the fighting include U.S. ground forces?
No, absolutely not.
So it's airstrikes only?
Well, not even that necessarily.
As far as you would be concerned?
I would not support any action unless there was a very clear understanding of what Maliki would or wouldn't do, who was running the army, and what third parties were going to be involved.
But can all that happen in a matter of days?
Sometimes,
they make it sound like they're on the march, that Baghdad could fall at almost any time.
I think that the outlook for that is somewhat more hopeful than it was just a few days ago, because they have rallied their forces in and around Baghdad. But sometimes it takes an emergency to focus the mind. I mean, before I left the Secretary of State's job, I had yet another conversation with Maliki. And, one of our problems with moving from dictatorships like Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi to incipient, embryonic democracies is that no one has that experience. And when you are inexperienced and you are required to make tough, hard choices, very often you fall back on what's most familiar. That can be religious identity, clan identity, tribal identity, personal connections, corruption as a means for getting things done. There is no training ground. These leaders, often they're former guerrillas, former insurgents, former exiles, former hard men, and they then find themselves in positions of responsibility without any real understanding of how a democracy is supposed to work. I mean, that's the problem we ran into with Morsi in Egypt. What an opportunity he had to show that, Muslim Brotherhood could actually govern like they said they were going to try to do, and slowly over time, purges, accusations, there is just a fallback position of differentiation of, you must be my enemy because you're not like me. And that takes a lot of time and, frankly, heartbreak and maybe bloodshed to get through.
Putin. Mm-hmm. You tell a remarkable story in the book about sitting with Putin at a dinner where he talks about his parents.
That's right.
Can you tell us that story? And
I'll try to do it briefly.
Yeah, because
Right.
more importantly, I want to get to what it says about him. But
Thank
tell
you,
us the
because that's
story.
why I included it. I was at a formal dinner, and because of protocol, I was representing the United States, so I was sitting next to President Putin. And we were talking. I told him I had just recently visited the huge memorial to the victims of the siege of Leningrad, now again St. Petersburg, and how moved I was by what I had seen and learned. And he said, well, you know, it was a terrible experience for everyone. My parents lived through it. In fact, my father had been on the front, and he came home to just rest up and to try to recover before he went back. And as he was coming down the street where our apartment was, he saw a huge pile of bodies, and men were loading those bodies into a cart to take them away. And he looked at the pile, and he saw this shoe, this leg that he thought was his wife's, and he demanded that they uncover her from under the pile of bodies. And he saw her, and he went to pick her up, and they told him, no, this woman is dead. And he said, that's my wife, I don't believe she's dead. And he argued back and forth until finally, I think they probably just said, take her. He picked up his wife out of this pile of bodies, carries her up the stairs into their apartment, nurses her back to health. Putin is born some years later. As soon as the dinner was over, I had a meeting with my team, including our very knowledgeable ambassador at that time, Mike McFall, expert in Russia. I told him the story. I said, Mike, have you ever heard that? And he goes, no, I've never heard that. I have since told it to other people. They have never heard it. If it's true, which of course he was very convincing in the telling, think of what that means. Think of what that tells you, not just about his personal experience, but the experience of Russia, of Russians alive today, what they went through from, you know, Stalin and purges to World War II and sieges and the tens of millions of people who were lost in that period of time, and then finally the collapse of the Soviet Union. If it isn't true, think about what that mythology tells you about his thinking, his conviction about what it means to be Russian and the kind of country that Russia should be.
What's his end game? You've seen him up close.
Yeah.
You've worked with him.
Right.
You've argued with him.
I have.
What's his end game?
He wants to restore Russian greatness, and that includes a sphere of influence from Central Asia through Eastern Europe, not reconstituting the Soviet Union so much as influencing and even intimidating the countries that are on that periphery so that they will follow Russia's lead. They use gas as a weapon, they use tariffs as a weapon, and then we've recently seen they use weapons as they invaded and annexed Crimea.
So what's the danger to the West?
The danger is several-fold. First of all, because I think he's kind of ad-libbing it, making it as he goes. I mean,
You really believe that?
I do. I mean, he has the overall vision, as I've just described it, about what he wants to see, but he's looking for opportunities. He's looking for weaknesses. He's looking for the potential to move forward on his vision. Remember, he really called the shots in the invasion of Georgia in 2008 and the annexation of 2 parts of Georgia.
And basically got away with it from the West.
Basically got away with it.
Will he get away with Crimea as he got away with Georgia?
I think right now it's too soon to tell because there is still a very active effort by Putin and either Russian military or sympathizers to continue to move into eastern Ukraine. But the final thing I would just throw in here is it's not just invading, annexing countries. He wants to create something called the Eurasian Union to compete with the European Union, and he's got Kazakhstan and Belarus, and he expected to add Ukraine to it. He is heavily influencing through money, through oligarchs and others, elections in Eastern and Central Europe, creating control over media outlets. He's in it for the long game, and the West, I believe, has to be in it for the long game. I mean, we fought wars.
But our attention span seems to drift quickly. Now it's Iraq.
Well, that's
kind of off Ukraine.
That's one of the reasons I wrote this book, because we've got to be able to do more than one thing at a time, and it's not just focusing on the headlines. Iraq is now in the headlines, but the trend lines. What does a kind of resurgent Russian game plan mean for Europe? We know that unless Europe diversifies its energy supplies, they're going to remain dependent on Russian gas. That's not good for them. It's also not good for, Canada and the U.S.
Speaking of energy, Canada and the U.S., when we come back, pipeline politics.
Keystone, yes or no? I'm glad you mentioned Canada, because
Yes.
I will be in big trouble if I don't ask a question that relates to our relationship
Exactly.
with the U.S. and Canada. And one of the issues on the table, and it gets quite involved in a number of different fronts, but it basically comes down to climate change, of which you talk in the book. You make an interesting point at in one area on that discussion, where you say it's a false choice to argue the economics of the situation, the climate change situation, over environmental protection. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that we have tremendous economic opportunities in clean renewable energy, in using natural gas as a bridge to cleaner renewable energy, in energy efficiency. I think that it will take careful planning to make the transition, which is what President Obama is trying to do now with the new standards on our coal-fired power plants. But it's a necessary transition, and it has economic benefits.
That's the point. Like Prime Minister Harper was arguing last week, that no country will take action on climate change if there's an economic detriment to it in taking that action.
Well, but look at what we do, and I can only speak for my country. I don't know about your policies. We highly subsidize, still to this day, fossil fuels. All kinds of tax benefits flow to oil companies and gas companies and coal companies. And although those are under scrutiny now, they still exist. Well, if the government's going to subsidize something, and that says nothing about what we do for nuclear power, which cannot be, plants can't be built or run without huge government subsidies, particularly for insurance. So the government's already got a really heavy thumb on the scale. Let's put an equally heavy thumb on the clean energy renewable side, and I will guarantee you that there is a path forward that will minimize the economic disruption as we make that transition.
Keystone, yes or no?
Well, I can't say that because I was there, and
I don't understand that. Why can't
Well,
you can talk about so many other things. Why can't you talk
because
about
that was a decision that rests with the Secretary of State, and my successor is going to have to make that decision one way or the other. And so I have, said it's inappropriate for me to comment on it. But I would just refer you back to what I was just saying. What I would love to see, and I don't know whether this could be done. Maybe it could start not at government to government level, but kind of a, what we call track 2 discussions. But Canada and the United States are an energy powerhouse. And the decisions should not be made one by one. There should be an overall effort to plan how we can do everything from coordinating our electricity grids to doing much more to fight climate change while providing the economic and energy needs of our people. Then I would like to see that conversation go to Mexico. I think North America can be the energy powerhouse of the 21st century. But again, I would like to see us not just be the energy powerhouse based on yesterday's fuels, but to do more working together to make that transition to clean, renewable energy.
Hillary Clinton, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.